inspired by a whole wave of immigration of young men in Egypt wanting to immigrate abroad, thinking that once they travel, they're going to make the biggest success possible, which doesn't always work this way. It's called a concerto for the nai. The nai is an Egyptian woodwind instrument, a kind of local or native flute of sorts. His earliest recollections were those of being dug deep in the black mud on the banks of the Nile in Upper Egypt, where the bamboo grows in thick, dense groves. From the very start, this stalk was strikingly more beautiful than the rest. The first 3 months, still green, he stood a supple, slender stem, his nodes perfectly chiseled, until the sweltering rays of Upper Egypt's blazing sun transformed him into a smooth, shiny, golden stalk. He became the center of attraction. The migrating birds, before starting their long northward journey, would flutter back to take a last glimpse of that smooth, shiny surface. The fish and all the other river creatures would swim close or at times fling themselves out of the water to rest at the foot of his stem, and in one last look take in all his beauty and perfection before they died. But he attached little or no importance to all this, for he was certain that he had been created for another life, something far better than the primitive country existence surrounding him. He was forever dreaming of going to Cairo, like some of his higher standing peers, the ones known as Indian bamboo, which were cultivated with exceeding care in special plantations and were transferred to the city where they were made into fishing poles or other piers, the ones with thick stems which were made into furniture and decorative objects. His ambitions, however, soared far higher. He was not going to accept being transformed into a commonplace fishing pole, swaying in the hands of a white-hatted old man sitting on a beach in Alexandria. Nor was he going to be debased into a chair for some ignorant human being to rest on. He would refuse that fate as much as he refused his present situation under the burning summer sun and the slashing winter winds and rain. That was not what this perfect stem had been created for. He was intuitively aware that one day, very soon, he would be entrusted to the hands of one of the best makers of musical instruments in Cairo, where he would be made into a unique nai, a nai of a quality hitherto unheard of, a nai that would fill the air with such heart-rending sounds that people would stop to listen. There would be a black oblong box with red velvet or green felt lining, wherein he would be treasured for a grand occasion. From among thousands of others, it was he who would be chosen for the first Oriental concerto to be composed for the nai. He dreamed of a gala performance at the Opera House, attended by official dignitaries, men of letters, artists, and the cream of high society. People's eyes would be riveted not on the symphony orchestra, nor on the visiting European conductor's baton, but on that exquisite nai and the music emanating from it. As for the experts in symphonic music, they would soon discover that he was in no way different from the rest of the Western wind instruments, be it the clarinet, flute, oboe, or bassoon. Whenever he looked at the surrounding environment, the black mud at his feet, small river creatures, ugly snails and algae, he felt nauseated. He had once heard from a foreign scientist visiting the area to take some samples of the soil that there existed over 30 million different varieties of microscopic organisms, bacteria, amoeba, etc., in every 1 gram of soil. If that was the case, then how could he, who was about to become a nai, live in such a polluted environment? He spoke to no one and he listened to no one, for the sounds that drifted over to him were all discords. They were sounds made by the rustling of bamboo stalks against one another, or the sounds of frogs and crickets in the evening, sounds he could not bear to hear and that kept him awake at night. Instead, he would only hear the sounds of his inner consciousness. They were not the insipid folk songs sung by the local people, but the sublime music composed in the form of a grand concerto for the nigh. No composer had actually written that concerto yet, but he already knew it by heart. There would be a lengthy overture to enhance and heighten his introduction, for after such a long delay in collaborating with the symphony orchestra, the nigh could not possibly be introduced after the first few bars, like the poor violin in Sibelius or Mendelssohn's concertos. Moreover, his introduction would come as an unexpected surprise, for everyone would be waiting to hear Oriental melodies, those usually played on the nigh, but his music would be purely Western, and gradually the audience would forget that they were listening to an Egyptian concerto composed for an Oriental instrument. As they became captivated by the beauty of his music, they would think they were listening to Beethoven's Emperor Concerto or one of Bach's Brandenburg concertos. He knew the details of the three movements of this unprecedented symphonic opus. The first movement would be an allegro con brio, the second an andante maestoso, and the finale an allegro molto vivace. Nor was this all, for his concerto was going to be totally different from all other concertos. It would not be the vague compositions Chopin wrote for his piano concertos, where the piano and orchestra practically melt into one another. They reminded him of the melodies he had often heard from the village people when they passed by him in their small boats, playing monotonous tunes on their local nai's. Oh, how it had bored him. Oh, how it had bored him. His concerto would be different. He would not repeat any of the themes after the orchestra. Instead, it was going to be the orchestra that would repeat after him. He would always be the originator at the forefront, with the orchestra following his lead. He could not envisage the concerto as a harmonious, well-arranged whole, but rather as a duel, escalating into a conflict between his boundless, impetuous melodies and the orchestra's vain attempt to catch up with him. Finally, the expected day arrived. A group of barefoot peasants staged an attack on the bamboo grove. They tore the bamboo stalks out from the ground, ripping out the dry foliage around him. It was known as the elimination process, usually completed at the beginning of the spring, before the start of the Hamasine winds. It was a painful and savage operation which he bore stoically. He could only think of the future that lay ahead of him in Cairo. He could hear the shrieks of pain emitted from the stalks around him as they were ripped by their roots from the earth. But his scream was more like the deep gasp of a newborn child before the first cry, a gasp that would be followed, in his case, not by a cry, but a passionate tune so powerful that after the gala evening and the opera, people would not cease humming it after him. He left for Cairo in a large truck that must have been sent especially for him, even though it carried hundreds of other things that he knew nothing about. For he hardly looked around him throughout the long trip from Upper Egypt to Cairo. He tried to endure the tiresome journey heroically, but he could not. It was stiflingly crowded inside the truck. He missed the fresh air he had been used to and the water too. He gradually began to feel the oppressive heat and the drought. Then he fainted. He woke to find himself in a flat in Cairo.